in a land of no constraints, you can afford to just be kind of fuzzy about it and pursue a lot of different directions because if the marginal cost is irrelevant, do more, right? Doing more is always going to be better. But when there is opportunity costs and trade-offs that need to happen, you have to be very articulate. You have to be very succinct with what is your thesis around what the brand is doing, where is their value creation and all that. And that's where you get everyone like actually collaborating and like making their case. And in an environment of healthy debate, you learn a lot from those conversations. And I feel like I've learned like 2 PhDs worth of personal development in the past 6 months, just having those conversations with my amazing colleagues.
Welcome to another episode of the Hypergrowth Experience. I am your host, Nima Gardide. Today, we're going to have Ian Young, the SVP of Revenue of Tonal, on the episode. I've been following Tonal and a lot of the different companies that Ian's been the head of growth of for the past few years. And, they've all done exceptionally when it comes to both just the approach they've taken to growing these companies and obviously Ian's sort of muscle of thinking about each of these wildly different products and services that he's been behind and applying more of like a process as opposed to tactics and figuring out what is the right solution to the growth problem of the time of the product that he's working on. And so I was quite grateful for Ian to spend this time with me. He's quite well known in the industry if you heard of him and his work, and he advises some companies on growth. And the main really question I had for him, and this is sort of where we start in the episode, is what is the sort of thread, the connective tissue underlying everything that has kept him going in his career since he's been in products and services and now healthcare and fitness and even SaaS. So he's kind of been around the block when it comes to helping tech companies grow. So we're going to start there. Here's Ian sharing the thread that he's carried across his career and experiences growing companies.
So for listeners who don't know, I mean, my career's been in industries from sort of e-commerce to meditation apps to betting to now fitness equipment. And the first half of my career was automotive manufacturing, which is a complete different world. But I think the connective thread through all of those different experiences is growing a company with constraints. So if you think about that phrase, necessity is the mother of all invention, constraints sort of gives, it is a challenge that if managed properly, generates amazing invention and creative thinking. And so constraints could be capital, cash, it could be time, it could be team size and bandwidth. But whatever, all my experiences has basically tackled that challenge of you have constraints that you have to manage. And that's the exciting part of the job.
And so this is like the sort of maybe quite well understood concept of if you box and constrain your creativity, you're going to be much more sort of creative within those constraints. Can you walk me through? So let's take that in a more like less abstracted way. Like, give me an example of, because you had less time or less capital, your sort of like universe of options were limited to X, Y, and Z. Like, how does that actually work in practice in some of these examples or companies that you've been a part of?
Yeah, I'll go back to my experience at Touch of Modern. So for context, Touch of Modern was a flash sales site and app that was launched right around the same time as Guild and the Roulalas of the world. And the interesting story there is that the founders actually landed on that concept as their third pivot. So they raised money in an incubator for an idea that flamed out. They pivoted to another idea, also flamed out, and Touch of Modern was sort of the last gasp. Let's take whatever runway we have to try and see if this thing sticks. And it did, and it grew to sort of over $100 million in GMV. The challenge there, though, is because a lot of the capital was burned through two previous failed ventures, and there was raised a follow-on round was raised. Cash was very, very constrained. So it was VC backed, but it didn't have that same kind of grow at all cost mentality, or it just wasn't possible to. And so all the spend had to be incredibly profitable in order to self-fund itself. And when I joined, it was sort of starting that inflection point of diminishing returns on spend in Facebook and the digital channels. And we were left with that conundrum of, well, we reached a point of diminishing returns where we had to find more efficiencies, and we couldn't just continue to spend into the channels that were working, or were starting to work less efficiently at the time. And so we started to think outside the box and see if there were arbitrage opportunities in other channels. And where we landed on was linear TV, and very, very scrappily, like linear TV, the perception and common wisdom at the time is that it's super expensive. You need to spend like 50 to 100K just to shoot the creative. Then to buy a media plan is another 100 to 200K worth of media, so on and so forth. And you're never going to be able to measure the results. So unless you're a big brand aiming for brand awareness, it's a fool's errand. But we put on our scrappy hat and figured out how to challenge all of those different assumptions. We ended up shooting our TV creative with our in-house photography team. The total budget was about $3K, and that was the Airbnb that we rented to shoot as a location. We used our own employees as actors. So creative, check, $40K. That was easy. We ended up finding a media agency that was willing to work with us for a $40K media budget and over a month. So the media plan was fairly tight. And we were able to sort of get analytics tools off the shelf on a free trial, and we built out some custom stuff ourselves to really sort of get the measurement and attribution piece down. We threw a flyer, we tried it, $50K total all in, and it worked. And then we started scaling from there. After about a month, we're spending more than six figures a month. We scaled it to seven figures soon after that. And yeah, at one point we were the second largest D2C advertiser behind Peloton on TV. On TV.
This is at Touch of Modern.
That's at Touch of Modern, yeah.
That's an interesting thing. So first of all, there's something you mentioned there that I think I get asked this often, and I think people have a bit of trouble understanding how to do this analysis, which is you felt or you knew that the marginal cost of acquisition on the existing channels was increasing. Basically, that you're saturating these channels, right? So how do you know that? How do you think about that? How do you think through on a per channel basis that you're reaching sort of the limits of the channel?
Yeah. Well, so it's actually two parts. So how do you see that you're hitting a problem is, I mean, your CACs go up, right? So like you're just getting less bang for your buck. That's obvious. You mentioned saturation, and it could be. So that is one hypothesis, that your audience is completely saturated. You've reached everyone that there is to reach in that place, and you sort of fished the pond. Overfished the pond. But there's actually another hypothesis, which is competition has entered into that space and CPMs go up, and it's an economic problem, not a sort of audience targeting problem. And I think that was actually our problem at Touch of Modern, and we saw that by just looking at CPM trends and just competitive audience insights on search and stuff like that, Search Console insights. And which is why one of the core theses for going into linear TV was that we had these tailwinds of everyone was fleeing linear TV, because of viewership trends and competitive dynamics. Like we were sort of like going against the current, if you will, which is a core hypothesis that we wanted to validate, which is why we tried it in the first place. and it turned out to be true. So, I mean, people have been touting that linear is dead. This was in 2016, 17, by the way. So a while ago.
Right when the big shift was happening from
exactly right.
These budgets, yeah.
I am convinced that linear is a decaying channel, but the time scale of that is, I think people estimated that it would happen more quickly than it did, right? There's still massive, or back then there was much larger audiences than there is today. But there was an opportunity, there was an arbitrage opportunity there, and we took advantage of that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that what you mentioned there is quite, there's a lot of wisdom behind it. I think there's, I'm sure you've read this very old blog post by Andrew Chen around the laws of shitty click-throughs. And I think people probably have read this and sort of like take it to heart in this sometimes counterintuitive way of trusting that the moment the channel is saturated, it's over and you should never look at it. What you've clearly sort of pointed out at that time was that people were shifting budgets. So there was actually an opportunity to come back to one of these obviously well-used channels in the past that competitions had lowered in. That makes a lot of sense. And it's quite interesting. I mean, now it's wow, it's a long time from now. So the 2017, 2016, do you still, coming to your current sort of maybe the past couple of years, do you still track, how do you track these things on TV? Like, do you run tests on a geographic basis? Like, are you running some sort of like marketing mix model? Give me like a quick, and we can go back to the connective tissue, but out of curiosity, how do you track these things? How do you try to figure out if it's valuable to spend the money there? And even then, I think, what analytics tools we're using, how are you judging the spend?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, linear TV, and actually I'd extrapolate it to any channel. Every channel has their challenges, and it's you're trying to paint a picture with dots, right? And so every data point is a dot, and you're kind of just like trying to put all the dots together to see if you can divine some image from all those different dots. And at Touch of Modern, what we cared about was sort of acquisition. And so the way that site worked is that there was a hard sign-up wall where you had to give us our email to see the assortment and to see the products that we're selling on any given day. That obviously created a lot of friction, which product teams and everyone who joined Touch of Modern was like, we should drop the wall. But that was actually a very key feature for us because it gave us first-party data, like very, very high fidelity first-party data, right? And again, this is in 2016, 17, so very different from the world today where everyone's talking about first-party data. We were way ahead of the curve there. But what we were able to do is using sort of spike time series analysis, we'd know when a spot ad aired to the minute. We'd see a spike in site traffic and therefore email signups. And then because we had that first party data, we could track that journey all the way through to if they purchased something, what they purchased, and then repeat purchases and so on and so forth. So that was the way we did it at Touch of Modern. Our drop off on that sign up wall was very, very, very small, like surprisingly small. Like anytime anyone saw that, it was like a majority of our traffic gave us their email, which obviously helped with CRM and all that kind of stuff later. But that was a very unique business. Not every business has that capability to capture first party data basically on a majority of their traffic, like high 90% traffic. Other businesses, and so I've done TV with other businesses with Parachute. We do it with Tonal as well. You have that same time series spike for linear TV. You can't track it to perfect first party data, but you have some pretty good fidelity with just anonymous cookies. And then you try and filter out sort of traffic from other sources, and you do a little bit of MTA segregation to get that to work. But the real
for listeners, MTA stands for multi-touch attribution. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah, too many acronyms. But the key thing is to do incrementality testing, and that's where you use like geo holdouts. And that the concept there is you have a test and control. You want to make sure that any ad that you air has a causal impact on the metrics that you're trying to optimize for, sales, bookings, whatever. And so you will air ads in a particular geo or DMA, but you will be dark somewhere else. And then you'll measure the relative change in bookings, assuming that the markets are matched and of comparable size and brand affinity, product affinity, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I'm actually quite happy marketers have started doing a lot of more incrementality testing. It's quite interestingly, obviously from like the old world of marketing, and it's now coming back. It's making its way back to modern marketing. Just to go back to this connective tissue part, so there are constraints. There's capital, time constraints. Do you run like more a classical sort of like growth experimentational process within the orgs that you run? Like, what is the like underlying process around these things? Are you sort of like using conviction that you personally have, using conviction that a team has to in this case, allocate like 50K to this test? Like, what is the either tooling or process that you use to prioritize some of these ideas that you guys have?
Yeah, so that goes back to the whole constraint. Like, if the constraint is not time, then setting up processes and creating rigorous sort of flows and organizations to handle growth experimentation, I think is the right call that optimizes for quality. But if time is a constraint, then typically it's because of some turnaround type scenario where there's like, you have to get a particular objective done in a very short period of time. And you don't have the luxury to like create these all-inclusive sort of democratically informed growth experimentation frameworks. You do have to start working a little bit more from conviction, experience, and like bias for action types of scenarios. And so I guess what I'll say is I'll use an example from Tonal. So when I joined, we had sort of transitioned from a period where there was sort of the old set Silicon Valley paradigm. Money, capital is free and ever flowing, and you just want to kind of grow at all costs. The constraint is not time. The constraint is where's infinity, and how quickly can you reach there. To a new world where capital is not free, and you have to achieve profitability and be able to control your own destiny. And there's a very, very hard limit on that, which is when your cash runs out. In that world, it was a more directive, like, okay, these are the things, analyzing your P&L, where are the opportunities for you to make an impact, go do that thing, hope and place your bets, hope they pay out. Fortunately, they did, and now we're moving into a different world. But those turnaround scenarios don't have the luxury of sort of that type of growth experimentation framework. Another example I'll use, which is at Parachute, they were already profitable when I joined, and it was more, how can we start to inflect that and incorporate ideas from every part of the business? That challenge was an alignment challenge, right? And so different teams had different ideas of what was driving the business. Everyone wants to grow the business, right? So it's kind of a misnomer to say that, oh, the growth team is responsible for growing the business, but like the merchandising team would beg to differ. It's like they want to sell more stuff too, right? And the brand team as well. Everyone wants to grow the business. It's just a matter of what perspective they bring. And the process there was a way to make everyone feel heard, give their inputs, but distill it into a common framework. And there was a lot of analytics work that we had to do to educate the company, the entire org, around what are the drivers for the business and what is each individual team's impact on that granular piece of that model. and then move forward. And then after that, then it's just sort of table stakes, sort of RICE framework and brainstorming, collecting, triaging, implementation, and sprints to reflect on what worked and what didn't work.
Yeah, just run through the ringer at that point of just like executing on things and prioritizing. Yeah, I mean, okay. There's these two areas I think we can spend a bunch of time on. So let's start with. I think Parachute was quite interesting around this, how to educate the people within the different parts of the org, and maybe at a more of like a high level. Like, what do you think the role of the growth leaders in an organization are? Like, I think there's a lot of names people have for these roles. There's VPs of marketing, VPs of growth. Chief revenue officers, all these different names people use, but putting the naming aside, or maybe you have opinions on what they should be called as well. What do you think their role is in these types of organizations? And let's use these sizes, like a couple of hundred people, hopefully on the closer to the profitable side. Like, what is a good growth leader's job in these orgs?
I mean, I've had growth titles, I've had marketing titles, I've had now my title is revenue, SVP of revenue. So I don't know. I'm a little sort of, I guess, cynical with titles. Titles don't really mean much. It's what are you trying to do, right? And everyone is trying to grow the business, and a key business metric that sort of matters. So knowing that it is impossible for any one individual or team to be able to do that. I would say that the role of a leader, any leader, is to make sure that there's sort of synergies with the team in its place. So org design is a little outside of my scope, right? So I've come into orgs that have already been existing, and there's already been clear boundaries. So I haven't participated, or I've been a part of reorgs, but I haven't sort of mandated this is how it's going to look like. But there's always going to be synergies and dependencies on other teams and other functions. What those functions and what their strengths and I guess weaknesses or opportunities for support, how you fit into that jigsaw puzzle is I think key, right? So I'll give an example. Again, going back to Parachute. Parachute was a very brand led. Like the strength of that business was its brand, and it's very clear. This is who we are for. This is who we are not for. This is our value prop. And if I were to go into that business as like a performance leader and say, well, let's just put out a whole bunch of sort of discount codes all over the place, it probably would have been detrimental to the overall brand of the business. And so getting tight synergies with a VP of brand at the time was crucial for that business. Less so in other businesses that maybe aren't so dependent on the brand or that didn't have such a strong brand leader in its place. So I don't know, a little roundabout way of saying that I think making sure that you find the right partners to you identify and work with the right partners to drive the value drivers of that business is crucial. And it really just depends on the business because you kind of have to work with it. If you think going back to the constraints thread, the team as it is existing, that is a constraint. Like you have the team, you don't want to go in there and say like, I want to get rid of and change everybody. Like that's unrealistic and you kind of be a shitty person if you did that. But they're generally, if the team is there, they're there for a reason. Outlier poor performers aside, and how do you work with those people is I think a challenge that I find fascinating.
Yeah, what's interesting around what you just said there, it just feels like what your job is to figure out what makes that company special and what has like made them who they are to that point, and then sort of use that to grow it even further, right? So like you're going to partner with the brand folks and figure out what can they do with alongside all the other parts of the org in order to cohesively help grow the organization. And I assume with Touch of Modern, it was like extremely performance driven just because of the style of that business. And then you went to a fully like brand driven company. How
Yeah.
did that, first of all, how did that feel? Like that feels like
It
a very different
was,
set of conversations to
yes,
have.
there was a lot of learnings and knocks. Not gonna lie, it was not the smoothest of transitions. If you ask any of my early colleagues at Parachute, they'll tell you it was a little bumpy. But I'm happy to say that we're very close now, and I think there's a lot of close friendships that I built over my time at Parachute. But I'd say actually, Touch of Modern performance wasn't the driver. Performance was where we spent a lot of our budgets, but the driver of that business was actually the buyers and the merchandisers. So the products we sold was the driver of that business, right? And so working with our head of sales and buying at the time, that was the key relationship in the Touch of Modern business. If you think about the value prop that Touch of Modern gave was not that selling stuff cheap. It was the discovery aspect of finding products that people didn't even know existed. And so that was the core driver of that business, allowing ourselves to, how we set up the process to find those unique products and then amplify and distribute awareness of those products was the key driver there. And then the ads, because the business was so profitable, that was the fuel, the gasoline we threw onto the fire to make it grow faster. But the fire itself was not performance. But yeah, Parachute, the brand was a big focus there. So how do we, the challenge with Parachute was, how do we refine and distill down that brand essence into something that was clearly aligned and articulated? So we had a very strong point of view, but it wasn't perfectly articulated to everybody in the organization and also externally. And so being able to do that and then amplify that was the challenge with Parachute.
Mm. And so were you, and that seems like a messaging problem. So were you spending time like testing different ways of talking about the brand internally and externally? Like how did you approach that problem? Given that there were I assume some brand folks within the org that would have disagreed with you a bunch to even experimenting.
Yeah, no, 100%. And it was less about external experimentation and it was more about internal workshopping. Because one of the key things about this type of brand work is that you have to stay true to your heritage, right? Like it would be inauthentic to have some external party or new person to this brand say, hey, we're going to do all this work. And then here's this brand new spanking version 2.0 of the brand, right? Especially when the version 1 was so beloved by our core customers, right? And so it was internal workshopping. It was about many months, I'd say 3 to 5 months worth of work where we would sort of break down the brand into a framework, and then we'd do stakeholder interviews to say, okay, this is what this part of our brand ethos is, distill it down and do various iterations of this new articulation of the brand. Not that we changed the brand, we just articulated it in a crisper way. We got alignment on that, and then we started sort of putting that message out in the market, and then use typical performance marketing testing tools to say, does this work better than this? And it did. So.
Yeah, it's actually quite refreshing to hear that because, and for context, I think you know this, I help run a performance agency, and quite often companies will come to us with the same sort of like one-liner of like, hey, we want to hear that you're going to be true to our brand and work within our constraints. And unsurprisingly, I think, to you probably, often they're not very succinct about what their brand actually stands for and what the constraints really are. And then so we spend quite a lot of time doing some of what sounds like you had done internally of, let's actually define what the constraints are. Like, let's try to figure out what it is that's special about your brand. And it is in itself a skill to be able to not only understand, but also communicate what the constraints of the brand are. And I think this is like the bane of our existence on a week-to-week basis, like of working with founders who they feel what it is hard to articulate and put into words those feelings of what it is about this ad or this approach that's not working. And I think that in itself is something we've learned over the years of like giving them tools and words to use to describe what's going on and what they like or not like about an interpretation of their own brand that they've sort of handed to us, right?
No, at Touch of Modern, we had our CEO and co-founder. He was the ultimate arbiter, and he spent more time than I'm sure he wanted to, just being yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, which obviously is not scalable. So that is, I think, super important once you start to get to scale. But more importantly is that you have a founder that actually does have a point of view early on, right? So from 0 to 1, it's okay to have that, just feel it in my gut, sort of articulation of a brand, as long as they do have that strong feeling and point of view. But yeah, you get to, I don't know, Series B, 100 people, 100 million revenue. Yeah, you need to be able to articulate it outside of your brain.
Yeah, and I think that it's a skill, and some founders are quite good at it, and some have to learn, and they, the really good ones eventually figure out how to articulate it, and then that's kind of how they scale their org up.
I'd say actually good marketing folks, like that. If you do that brand exercise, there's a lot of agencies and consultants that can help with that work. It's just doing interviews, providing prompts to workshop those different, where are the red lines, where are the gray areas. So it doesn't have to be the founder by themselves.
Yeah, that's the point. You can put them in a process to help articulate it.
Yes.
So let's go to your experience in Tonal. You've been there for a few months, and I think the world has changed as you've been there in a couple of different ways. And first of all, let's address that. And I think I don't know how you feel about it, but I feel quite great about it. I think I'd like to be in a world where I'm judged for making money as opposed to just growing the thing on top line. But what's quite interesting about what you said earlier is going through the P&L and sort of taking a look and figuring out where the opportunities are, where you can make cuts and where you can change things. And to some extent, that I feel is like the job of a founder. And it's actually quite lovely to hear a growth person have the same mindset. But is that sort of a mandate that's given at the organizational level of let's find all the different ways we can tighten up? And do people get excited about that in your experience, or do people are like, oh, well, I wanted to be part of this like rocket ship, and this is not the vibe I wanted. Like, what happened when this shift ended? Maybe you arrived afterwards, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
The mandate is reality, right? Like your bank account and the cash burn dictates the reality of what you need to do. So like the market will force you to do what needs to be done, right? And I think the excitement depends on how you frame it. So if your positioning is that, oh, exciting work only happens if you're a rocket ship and you get to spend $100 million budgets, when you don't spend $100 million budgets, of course, people are going to be disappointed, because that's how you framed it up, as all the exciting work is in spending $100 million budgets. The way I've tried to frame it with my team is the spending of budgets is a tactic. Like, that's just one thing that you happen to do. The real exciting work is building a generational company that is like beloved and has like amazing name recognition and actually delivers value in the world, right? Like no one cares about sort of whatever hot startup that flamed out. I'm not going to name names, but like there's Netflix documentaries about these companies that ended up being frauds, and you don't want to be associated with those companies. You want to be associated with like the Apples of the world, right? And how did those companies get to where they did? Well, they have to be profitable. If you don't generate money in the long run, you can't sustain. No business is going to just be no one's going to be dumb enough to just throw money at a problem forever. Eventually, they're going to expect a return. The sooner you can prove that return, the more successful you're going to be, right? And then I go back to that frame of constraints, right? It's so much cooler to solve a problem when you actually bring some creativity and bring a novel approach to solving that problem, rather than throwing money at a problem. like anybody can throw money at a problem. It's like, oh, we need to do this thing. I'll give McKinsey, I don't know, $10 million and they'll solve it for me. Like that's kind of a cop out. I don't get any personal satisfaction for throwing money at the problem. But so anyway, that framing helps with like internal morale and whatnot. In terms of like the cutting and understanding where there's value, like I said, it's a market exercise. We had to get our OpEx to a level that was reflective of the market conditions in our funding environments, in our instill sort of priorities as an organization. And the cool part of that work, I would say, is actually defining what those priorities are, right? So again, if you think about the whole brand articulation in a land of no constraints, you can afford to just be kind of fuzzy about it and pursue a lot of different directions because if the marginal cost is irrelevant, do more, right? Doing more is always going to be better. But when there is opportunity costs and trade-offs that need to happen, you have to be very articulate. You have to be very succinct with what is your thesis around what the brand is doing, where is their value creation and all that. And that's where you get everyone like actually collaborating and like making their case. And in an environment of healthy debate, you learn a lot from those conversations. And I feel like I've learned like 2 PhDs worth of personal development in the past 6 months, just having those conversations with my amazing colleagues.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you're putting out this problem and then sort of having people come in with potential solutions and thinking through these things like with the team quite involved to figure out how to solve this general problem. Is the process similar to a growth process where you're trying to like vet ideas to some extent and cut here and there? Like how is it similar? Is it totally different? Like what's going on there?
I wish I could tell you there's like this like a book ready process that I could like start selling and be a New York Times bestseller. But no, it's much messier than that. It's much more organic. It's, the prioritization aspect, I guess, would be very similar. Just start with your largest line items and start poking and digging into those largest line items, and then move down the chain until you get to the bottom of the P&L and start again. But each one of those double clicks, there was, and again, because of the short time frame that we've had to operate under, we did have to make some judgment calls where it was just, hey, I don't think this is a direction that we need to go in because of X, Y, and Z. I don't have hard data to back this up, but logical, like thought experiment. Does this seem like the highest ROI place to invest our dollars? And then anyone disagree? Please debate. Let's dissenting opinions. Let's hash it out. But otherwise, very quickly, okay, that got put on the chopping block, and then rinse and repeat. Now, if there is sort of very monumental, like, oh, this is a one-way door. So using it at Amazon, I didn't work at Amazon, but a lot of my direct reports and former bosses did, and so a lot of the terminology of one-way door, two-way door. The difference is like two-way doors, you make a decision, you can reverse it, you can go back. One-way doors, like you make that decision, you're done. For the one-way doors, we did spend some more time sort of collecting data, doing some experimentation to validate that was the right idea. Yeah. So I don't know. I wish I could be more succinct.
No, I think that actually is quite succinct of like going through this process over and over again. And it's just not going to be as maybe tightened up just because of the time constraint part, as you mentioned, right? There's like a time constraint. So spending too much time on process is just not going to help you get there. Is there how much transparency do you have to sort of give to the org or to at least your team who's kind of thinking about these things? Like, is everyone reading the P&L, or are you only reading it and then sort of like saying, here's like this part of it, and then we should discuss like, and then I think some of that is probably cultural as well. So I'm curious, like sort of what you think is happening right now, if that's good, or there's a different version of it that you would have preferred. Yeah, very curious about that.
I think that question of transparency needs to start with the top leadership, right? Like that is a very, I think, important cultural decision that's made. Like you go to the radical transparency extreme of like, I don't know, Ray Dalio, whatever. Like that's too much, I think. To being completely secretive, and obviously somewhere in the middle is ideal. We are trying to be more transparent with our teams, and so we are sharing sort of profitability numbers and targets, and like being very transparent with the reality of the situation. The thing to keep in mind with that, though, is one, education. Does everyone in the organization have the sort of financial literacy to interpret the statements in the way that they are actually intended? That's an education piece. So we have done a lot of that as well. But there's also the balance of, is it useful, right? Because there's certain challenges with like balance sheet, for example. Most individual contributors are not going to be able to do anything to that, right? It's just your capitalization structure. Being aware of, hey, these are our challenges. Yes, that is useful. Everyone should have an idea of what is the current state of affairs for context at the very minimum. But like knowing every nitty gritty detail about that, probably not useful. So that's how we try to balance it.
Yeah, and I find that quite interesting. I think I fall probably similar in terms of philosophy to what you mentioned, which is kind of like the Ray Dalio, but I think in the tech industry, like companies like Buffer or Bolt that are that they're extremely transparent, and there's formulas for everyone's salaries, and you can go into their docs and literally look at every single line item and where the money's spent. And I think those are actually like radical in some ways, in that they're taking away privacy from the employees to some extent. And I find that to be like, I guess you are opting in if you're joining that to be in that culture. I find that you're limiting basically your talent pool to some extent by doing that, and those things are good things. I just don't want to run that type of company, but I also don't like the sort of like I think Apple is notorious at this, where it's extremely secretive, and you have to sign NDAs to talk to teams within the org and that type of stuff, where they're pretty serious about their secrecy. And I think that also in itself similarly is like a function of we're going to attract talent that cares about this, and that's they vibe with that. Where I think some were closer to let's say Ray Dalio-esque stuff I like, but not all the way there. And but I've also found this exact problem that you're talking about, which is people just don't understand this stuff. Like they're either not intellectually interested in it, so even if you throw it at them, they're just going to go through these numbers and not understand or not care enough. Or they care about it, they think that conceptually, because they're like, oh, I'm working at this transparent company, that's great. But they just are like so far away from having done the work of understanding how to look at finance data and information like that, that you have to spend a good amount of time educating them. So, but I do think that's good work. Like I think you should be doing that work and educating the team. When it comes to communication, like do you have like a system that you follow or have followed over the years where there is a cadence to it, where you're trying to give information to the team that you're working with, at least your direct reports, if not the rest of the company, on growth? Like how do you handle that? Is there like one that has been your favorite, or like one that you carry with you, or like, hey, I want to email the team once a week, or like every day, or once a month? Like what's been going on there?
So, I mean, all hands, I think all senior leadership, like that's just a cadence. Everyone should just be sort of level set at the same time and have the opportunity for anyone from any part of the organization to ask questions. I think that's important. Functional team staff meetings, so just a little tighter, especially for orgs that have multiple layers. It becomes important to have a translation layer in between, so that you can get the appropriate level of granularity to where it needs to be, but it's not appropriate to do it all over the place because functional teams have different needs. We use Slack, so Slack channels with very specific requirements or audiences. We'll do asynchronous communication there. I mean, we could spend a whole couple of days on this topic, but yeah, I mean, you're trying to balance sort of like the need for synchronous versus asynchronous, the need for specific versus just like overarching context. Is it communication that should be discussed, or it's just like one way informational? It kind of depends.
And so when you're working on something like in the context of Parachute, you mentioned that you had to go and sort of make sure that everyone had analytics that they were looking at in the context of the business. Are you giving them sort of access to their own dashboards?
Yeah.
Are you reporting with them? Yeah. So like everyone sort of is looking at their own slice of the business.
What's not measured doesn't get done, right? Or improved. Probably butchered that. Anyway. Yeah, I mean, everyone should be looking at what they need to do their job as part of the business. But that should be collectively bubbled up so that other people and everyone is looking at that at the very minimum for context, but also to drive accountability, right? You don't want to be in a situation where people are kind of like doing their thing, but then they're not held accountable to that. And then other people that might depend, or the functions that might depend on those outputs as inputs to their function, end up getting sort of shafted. And then it just becomes this vicious cycle of finger pointing and whatnot. So that is a place where I think transparency is super important. Everyone should know everyone's business, not because you want a finger point, but like that's very important context. And also that's also a great rallying cry for, hey, I'm having this problem here in this part of my function. Oh, other people can come in and help, right? Because again, you're one organism, one function never operates in a silo, or shouldn't operate in a silo. So if you have that transparency, you enable the opportunity for people to collaborate and work together to solve collective problems. If those metrics are actually important to the business, everyone should be looking at them and striving to help. If they're not important and they don't drive the business, then, well, you shouldn't have been looking at that in the first place.
Yeah, I think what you're describing is kind of what I've been in other organizations. I must admit I haven't been in one in a very long time that isn't mine. But when I have worked for other people or with other folks that have created organizations that I've been in, it's kind of what I would have wanted. I would have wanted to understand what other teams are doing. And quite often, I did that work myself. And I think similar maybe to you, I wanted to understand how the businesses are run so that I can sort of help grow them. And so it's rare that that's kind of like inherently in the culture of the companies, at least the ones I have been a part of. And maybe that's why they're not the most massive businesses. But when these things come together, it feels like that's how you sort of get people to collaborate in a way that kind of grows the whole pie very well.
Like the end state of having an organization that everyone knows everyone's business and everyone can jump and collaborate, that's obviously a great sort of utopian end state. The work to get there, there's a lot of forcing functions that are beneficial otherwise, right? So in order to get to that end state, you need to have education across teams, right? So that helps actually remove a lot of misalignment. Often what I've seen when sort of teams are butting heads is because they're kind of using different vocabulary, or just their different perspectives are being weaponized, right? So you have an apple here, someone's coming in from this way, another person's coming from this way. It's different shapes. And so they perceive it as different problems, and then they propose different solutions that don't make sense in the other person's context. But once you do the work to educate, oh no, this is your perspective, this is your perspective, the problem is the same. It's still the apple that needs to be whatever attacked. But is there a way that sort of solves both parties' perspective? That educational work unlocks so much collaboration. So like I think that utopian state, besides just being cool to be there, the work to get there is so beneficial to improving culture morale. And it's just funner to work with colleagues where you understand and appreciate that different perspective, rather than resent and say things like, oh, that person just doesn't understand. Well, yeah, that's a shitty place to work.
Yeah, I really like that perspective because I had like flashbacks of in my earlier career, like talking to folks that cared a lot more about brand than I did, and finding resentment as opposed to like appreciating their point of view on things. Can you give me an example of like this, the apple from different perspectives, like just to like clarify what you're talking about? Because I think I intellectually understand what you're saying, but I'd love to get an example of like that work.
I mean, the age old like tension between brand marketing and performance marketing, right? It's like, oh, brand marketing thinks that performance marketers are robots and just look at numbers on a spreadsheet, and it's just like we're marketing to human beings. Performance marketers think that brand marketers are just in the clouds, untethered to reality, and sort of floating and talking about things that doesn't impact the day-to-day business. Obviously, both are gross stereotypes that are not true in either case. I would say the perspective from both, the way I anchor both of them is just the time series of what you're talking about, right? So both types of marketers want to grow businesses and like sell more product of whatever you're doing. It's just a matter of like, and what time frame are you looking at? So performance marketers, because it needs to be measured, it's the attribution window of whatever you're measuring, right? So is it a day, a week, a month, whatever? That is performance marketers' literal blind spot, is that they have no way of seeing things beyond that time series or that time frame. Brand marketers think infinity, like forever, right? It's just the length of memory. As long as people remember a brand, that's what's important to them, right? And so bridging that gap is the way I found to unify and get brand marketers and performance marketers to sort of speak the same language. It's just a matter of how long you're looking at. Brand awareness, like those brand metrics, it's much longer because people's memories are longer. Different than attribution windows, which are very tight typically.
Yeah, I like that perspective a lot, and I think like the way I try to sort of instill the same mentality in our team is that if there was no brand marketing, you would get screwed at some point anyway as a performance marketer, because you need them to sort of warm up audiences for you, and to some extent, right? Like before you show the performance ad, if they've never heard of your product in the past, and you're in part of the demand curve that isn't easily convincible or isn't really in market immediately, then you're just going to be in trouble. Let's touch on this attribution stuff in general. So you've been more on the brand side before. You obviously have done a lot of performance, and you touched on multi-touch attribution earlier. No pun intended. Do you? And there's incrementality tests now, and all this sort of marketing mix modeling stuff that's come around the last couple of years, or come back around the last couple of years. Do you think everyone should have some multi-attribution model? Is there like a time in which you start thinking about it? Do you stop looking at that altogether when you're at a certain scale and just look at these sort of marketing mix models to make decisions? Like, how does that process work in your mind? And I know you advise other startups and companies, so I'm sure you're looking at all sorts of things now.
Yeah, no, for sure. They're all tools, right? Every tool has its time and a place. It has its strengths and what it can do and things that it can't do. And I think the biggest, mistake that brands or companies or marketers do is try and use the same tool for every single situation, right? So it's like you're trying to hammer a nail with a screwdriver. Like it just doesn't work. Like from the evolution of like, okay, well, last click attribution, easiest, like go to Google Analytics and it'll just be done for you. Yes, obviously it's useful, but it has its limitations. You go to the other extreme, you mentioned media mix modeling, many limitations there. And if the tool and the brand doesn't have scale of spend, for example. So if you're not spending meaningful budgets in a particular channel, and meaningful is relative because you just need to have signal from noise, it's useless. If you don't have significant changes in your sort of market dynamics, right? It's all just kind of steady state and you're spending. also going to be useless. So like you have to have changes in your impact to make media mix modeling work. I propose that incrementality testing is, I think, the most multifunctional tool. So if you have rigorous empirical data on a test and control, is it actually an A/B holdout test? Is it a geo lift test? Is it whatever? There's many ways to achieve that result. But I would propose that that's actually the most useful one, because that's the one that actually ties directly to a business KPI, right? And you have to use your creativity to make those. How do you make that type of approach work for your different channels? That is not an easy task. More art than science, I'd say. But again, all these attribution tools, they're just meant to help you make decisions. They don't have to be perfect. So another thing that I advise anyone who will listen actually is, who cares if it's 3.1% or 3.4%? It's 3%. It's not 50%, right? Or the ROAS is whatever. Like there's a sense of false precision in attribution that is super detrimental to decision making. Because most oftentimes that false sense of precision is for a little bit of CYA and just covering your ass and trying to justify vendor relationships or things like that. So as long as you're mindful around sort of like, where is there actual precision, a need for actual precision, versus just trying to gild the lily and make things up, really. When you collectively look at all the different outputs of these attribution models, it's generally good enough and you can make good decisions. And it's basically, should I spend more into this or not?
Yeah, and I think it's funny enough that it's somewhat hard to get people to agree with what you just said. Like I find it, it's part of my job quite often to go and tell people that your attribution model, in whatever format it is should be used for directional decisions and not for financial accuracy. Just because of what you just mentioned, there's just so much fuzziness in there that I wouldn't trust my own business to try to use an attribution model to figure out exactly how to, if my unit economics are working well or not. There was some of that. Again, like directionally, you have some of that information in that model and it can help you. But it's just I think like going back to like the phrase you use is just a decision-making framework. Like I'm trying to use this framework to make better decisions, and it actually helps with that. At that is quite good for helping me allocate my budget in these different ways, or kill creative that's not performing well based on this model, and so on and so forth.
You can get really good signal on a relative basis, right? So does this work better than this? Does this channel more productive than this channel? There's a lot of tools that are very good at identifying that. And that's the decision you need to make. It's an ordinal decision, and it's not a specific, discrete, like I care that it's exactly generated however many dollars of revenue. The dollars of revenue that matters are the ones that go into your bank account.
Yeah. Like, are they actually getting there?
Yeah, exactly. Like, is it flowing through?
Okay. I have two questions for you. I think they're like somewhat related. One is like, in a business like Tonal, there is like the first purchase, right? There is like a big purchase I'm making, and then there's like a subscription component after the fact, right? And so you have to like make some decisions around like, are you going to break even on the hardware or not? And then like wait for the money to come back. And then that's kind of where your profits are. And I'm sure there's costs associated with every day these months, like you're producing content and so on and so forth. And so, the question there is, how do you think about sort of like CAC when it comes to that? And then I think the other question is related, is as you were talking about, in Parachute, there was all these different parts of the business that were related. And you know, if they did well, we would help the company grow, and Touch of Modern, similarly, the merchandising part. Do you have like a growth formula, at least in your mind, or very publicly in the organization that you're talking about? Like, these are the 4 or 5 variables that are related for us to make this thing work. Is that like living in your mind? Is that like very publicly discussed? Like, how do you think about that?
No, very, very much so. it's you need a framework that is publicly discussed or publicly like internally within the organization, right? People need to be aligned around why your view of the world is representative of like reality, right? And so I won't go too much into the specifics, but conceptually, you can think about acquisition as because it's so easy to like do incrementality testing and like, okay, how much acquisition is actually because of paid media, right? How much is the gasoline actually making the flame grow bigger? But then you also, it's important to measure and quantify how much acquisition is happening because the fire exists in the first place. And that's the organic stuff. That's your word of mouth. That's your PR. That's your organic social. That's your whatever, right? All the stuff that just makes you a good business to begin with. Like you have to quantify that, and you have to get people aligned to what they do. It matters to this because we're measuring this, and this organic exists independent of anything that happens on the paid media side. So that's like the first break. It's like, okay, yeah, paid is going to throw a lot of gasoline. If you look at it holistically, it introduces a lot of noise, right? Because depending on how big your budgets are, it can dwarf this. But this is still important because without this initial fire, the gasoline is just going to be sloshing around and it won't ignite. So getting the merchandising team at Touch 'em On, for example, getting the customer service team at Parachute just bought into the fact that if you provide good customer service, that improves our perception of word of mouth. There's going to be some word of mouth virality going on here. And if we can measure that and report out on that, hey, we're getting better over time, that's motivating to those teams to like continue to want to drive, not just to their own things, but that they're actually driving the business forward because they are, right? So that's, I guess, the first part. Like you have to have this model. It has to be communicated, it has to be educated, and it has to be accurate, right? Like you can't have a situation where we're doing well, but like that's going down. And so it does have to be representative of reality. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be directionally correct.
And so do you have models where you say if we had an increase of 10% in our NPS, we think that we would grow the business even, like we would reduce the overall CAC of the business by this much? Like, are you going that granular, or is it more of like a philosophical understanding of this?
Depends. So NPS is very noisy. I like philosophically, I think NPS is great because it asks you what you prefer, but it is so noisy. And so it's really hard to draw a quantitative analytical conclusion in that type of model. So that is more of a philosophical thing. It is possible to do sort of like correlation analysis around functional KPIs to this main metric. And so that's where you kind of have to do some art to know what are the ones that have the potential to be correlated, do the correlation analysis, and then prove that to teams.
That's cool, because something like response rates of customer service being correlated to I don't know, social responses, which is then so correlated to lower CAC and all this sort of stuff.
Installation times, right? Delivery times. So we had a big issue at Touch 'em On where stuff took a long time to get to our customers. That's correlated. For Tonal, it's you order. We have to like actually install it on your wall. It's not like we can just ship it and like, hey, figure it out yourself. People think that it's like a flat screen TV, but you don't hang off your flat screen TV and yank with as much force as you can, right?
Yeah.
So there, we do have a pretty involved operations team that makes sure that it is safe and it's well installed and it's clean and we're not like damaging anything. That takes time. We found that if we can shorten that time, there's increases in our conversion rates.
When you say it, it sounds quite obvious, right? But I think maybe if you're on that team, you don't recognize how important that may be. Or if you're on the marketing team, you're just thinking like, oh, that's not related. I'm just going to get people to go through the funnel as fast as possible. Let's go back. So this is kind of like the way I would like the growth to be discussed. And I think there's a component of it that I find curious, which is you're talking about working with a totally different team, like the merchandising team and like an operations team. And I assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, that they do not report to the growth team. Like they're like totally different functional teams, and they have their own KPIs and so on and so forth. So is part of this job just leading by influence, kind of like a product manager's role when they're building product? Like, are you just building relationships with these folks and aligning with them on these things? And I assume the founders are quite involved in this multifaceted way. Would you rather them report to you, or would you rather this is like the better way to have this run? Like, how do you think about that?
It's impossible. Like solving problems with reporting relationships, if that were the true solution, there'd only be one seat. Like it just funnels to one person, right? It's impossible, right? That's not a scalable solution. So you can't solve every problem just by reporting relationships. And I'd actually argue any leader should be leading by influence, right? But again, for the same corollary, it's like there's always going to be someone that doesn't report to you that's important to what you do, that you're going to have to build a relationship with and be productive, right? So I guess I'd answer it that way. Like the reporting relationships are obviously helpful in some situations, and it cuts through a lot of noise and reduces overhead for communications and whatnot. But again, it's not a catch-all solution that just solve it with like making it report to one person, because the flip side of that is you have concentration in perspective. Like you're not actually going to get that diversity of thought of someone with a different perspective. So it could bias yourself to too much groupthink. And plus it's just a lot of work. Like,
yeah, managing people.
It's a lot of work. I enjoy it, but it's a lot.
Yeah, and I think that's like well said, and especially on the part of like having someone maybe at your sort of like level to have to not only communicate with and align with, but also because they have like a similar level of, let's say, like for lack of a better word, power, they can push back against maybe the ideas that were not great that you had. And so that in itself is like a very useful sort of dynamic to be in. I find like a similar thing, especially around functional design. Like I think, and our org is fully functional. So like all the functions are separated, even though like quite commonly in marketing teams, for instance, you'll have like a marketing designer and like a growth engineer. And then, there's like those teams that report up to growth VPs and stuff. We don't do that. We have like a design team and an engineering team and a marketing, paid search or paid social org. They're fully separate. They run their own sort of processes, but then they work together on accounts for this sort of same thought process. And I'd say I've been like quite inspired by Apple in that way. I think they do a really great job at doing these functional org designs, but it's just been lost into the tech industry for some reason.
Yeah, I mean, org designs, I think sometimes get overused to like solve, like, what's the root problem? So like embedded teams, for example, like having like an embedded team, like a growth pod that has PMs and designers and engineers all focus on that one thing. Yes, it solves the problem around bandwidth and prioritization. They're going to be focused on this one problem together, so they won't be distracted by other demands. But like you create other problems, right? Because then the problem is the same. You just the volume or like the scope of problems just gets shifted from one. Like you solve one, but you create another.
And I think a lot of and one thing to that note is your org design maybe should change based on the problem at hand. So like if you are in the need of that sort of pod system, then switch to that and go for that for a while, because that's kind of the way you're going to be able to use your resources well. What type of sort of like, oh, sorry, go on.
No, I was saying we do tiger teams for specific problems. And so we'll say, hey, this is a problem that is multifunctional and collaborative in its very nature. It's very important. We need people like dedicated to, and we'll just nominate people as part of a tiger team to just in a small group, just like hash it out and report back to the bigger org. And we've used that a couple of times in total. It's a great success.
Do they hand their existing responsibilities over during that time, or they just take on this new responsibility as like a side thing?
It's a side thing. Yeah.
Startups.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask, and maybe this is kind of where we close it, is just the structure of the teams that you've been a part of. And I assume you've built some of these teams. So like, what is the types of disciplines that are reporting into the growth org? Like, are there marketers? Are they designers? Are there just marketers and growth folks? How have you been designing these teams?
It's how you balance like full-time headcount and agencies or consultants or support staff, right? And it's based on volume of work that needs to be done. So I've sort of on the paid side, there's channel managers and sort of like a director that's focused on sort of paid acquisition. I think analytics support, very important. If you're going to be doing incrementality testing and doing all these like data stuff, like you have to have someone pretty deep in the weeds doing that. Very important. Website maintenance and design and CRO testing is another functional specialty that I think is pretty important if you are an e-com business. The brand marketing skill set. So having someone that has that specific focus and perspective is important, and it might sort of manifest itself not just in sort of campaign management and like marketing calendar ownership, but organic channel and in some cases it might be influencer relationships, because the influencers are used as an expression of brand reach rather than pure performance. Influencers could also be pure performance, kind of depends on how you want to use those. Having creative support, so someone who has skill sets in either visual or auditory, like just from a creative lens in terms of the transforming a brief into an asset that resonates with consumers. That's a very important skill set. That's sort of like in the marketing world, right? And then obviously there's different functional levels in terms of levels of experience and how much firepower you want to put in a particular area. Product marketing also very important. UX research, user insights, super important. They're the counterpoint to the analytics people, right? So analytics can find out what's going on, like transform that into a hypothesis. Like why is that behavior actually happening? And you need to do qual research for that.
And I assume there's like a mixture of like some of these folks are in-house, some of these folks are like contracted, and you're tapping into like resources externally.
Yeah. I mean, if you have enough work and it's where it's crucial to have that in-house knowledge, domain expertise, then bring it in-house. If it's sort of periodic or not sort of core to your business, use an agency. That flexibility will be very helpful.
Awesome. Well, Ian, thank you so much for doing this with me. It was super fun to just learn from you and your experiences. I'm quite grateful for all the nuggets of knowledge that you bestowed upon me, and hopefully our listeners. Thank you for coming here, and I'm excited to see Tonal scale. You're just starting there, so it sounds like it's been already fruitful, and there's a lot more to be done on that platform, and it's quite of an interesting company. And I'll do an intro in the beginning of the pod for folks to know about these different brands you've worked on. But it's quite of an interesting one. I've been following it for a while.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
All right, and that's a wrap. Thank you so much for listening. As always, please subscribe and follow us on the different platforms you might be listening to this podcast. We want more people to know about this as we're trying to scale it up a little bit more. We're getting better and better guests as we've approached this podcast over the past year. Next up is going to be Ethan Smith. He's the CEO and founder of Graphite, who's quite of an interesting fellow. I'm excited for you to hear him talk about SEO. And we've got Bao Bong and from Placemaker, and my co-founder has done another episode with me, and we're going to share a bunch of our tactics. So a lot of interesting things coming up, and I appreciate you spending the time listening to this. Have a good one.